At the risk of upsetting everyone, I'll explain why the Australian bushfire is inevitable and it's cyclical and it's always to be expected. And it's been this way for millions of years. In fact, many people must already know that gum trees have evolved in a situation where occasionally they burn. And that is why they regenerate after a fire, and that's why they germinate seeds. And many plants in Australia germinate seeds on fire because these fires in Australia have been happening not just for thousands of years, but for millions and millions of years, untold millions of years. That I do not fact. I know because of the evolutionary process itself involved in creating species that adapt to certain things denotes a time frame far longer than what it involves humans and climate change, or humans and environmental changes. The reason for the cyclical burning of Australian bush, and it's happened dozens of times, and since white men has arrived, and many times before the white men arrived it happened, but Aborigines were a bit wiser than white men. They kept most of the bush cleared because they knew the risk of bushfire was a serious threat to life and limb, and a serious threat to the livestock that they relied on for food. But that's by the by. There's a very specific reason that Australia suffers cyclical bushfires, and this is this. It's due to the fact of the situation it is and how far it is away from the equator. That if further away you are from the equator, the less ozone there is, the more aridity there is. If your circumstances has it that you have less humidity within your environment as well, so that accentuates the problem of aridity. That is to say, if we take just a basic example that anyone can observe for themselves, if you go to the tropics or tropical island like Fiji or Vanuatu, it's very hot there, just as hot as it is in the centre of Australia. In Australia, it's very hot, but you do not get as burnt. That's because there's more ozone in the tropics, because ozone is created in the tropical areas as the oceans and the seas smash into the shores and rocks all over the place. It creates ozone, and that ozone is then taken up somehow to the, because it's specific gravity, it's taken somehow into the highest realms of the atmosphere and then protects the Earth or life forces from the radiation from the sun to some extent. Now, because of it's called the Coriolis effect, and it's also the equatorial conveyor, and there's also other things going on. But as you go further south or further north, as the case may be, you get because of the angle of the rays of the sun, and because of the greater dispersal of the ozone, there is more radiation hitting or striking the if you like, the celluloid, the moisture within the living contents that is in leaves and plant life and such like, and in the soils. And this means it's greater and greater aridity within Australia than is in the tropics, for instance. And because of, not just that reason, because there's another reason as well, because the Antarctica has a great effect on the Australian continent. Now you can look at the geological history of Antarctica and Australia, and it goes back nearly 35, 40 million years. And since Antarctica's been in that situation, the polar currents, the wind and cold currents that go around the polar regions, they affect the Australian weather and climate directly, because that means it's a cooler system. The oceans are cooler down there than they are in the tropics, so therefore you get less evaporation and less rainfall, so you don't get the convection rain that you get in the tropics, where it balls off the sea and it goes into, becomes clouds, and you have your tropical rainstorms. And that's two of the reasons. It's drier because of the cooler oceans where the wind comes from, which brings the moisture, which is the Southern Ocean, which predominates the inland, and you get some influences from the Pacific Ocean and the seas adjacent to the east coast of Australia, of course. but it is the specific fact of a thinner ozone over the more southern parts of Australia. It dries its forest naturally, and then they spontaneously can combust because of the gases given off by the gums and the leaves, then react with because the dust in the air creates a static charge, and that then ignites and can ignite and cause spontaneous combustion, which then sets off these catastrophic bushfires, and being the cause of the bushfire for millions and millions of years. That's just why eucalypts have specifically evolved in a country like Australia because of fire, because of the aridity, because the gum trees are very, very good when it's the times between the fires. When it does rain, they're very, very good at, they shoot their roots before the gum tree's 50 mil tall. Its roots go down a long, long, long way. You try to dig a 50 small gum tree up, and its roots go down a long, long way before it starts shooting stuff up. Because it knows it's got to get to the water as fast as it can, so it puts all its energy into getting to the water, or waiting where the water, which is below the ground. And at the times where you do get rain, in the time in the various rainy seasons, then the gums take advantage of that, put more leaves out, and when on the dry seasons, they let the leaves go and they let the bark go as they swell each year, and all that bark and all that leaves and all the branches they discard in the dry season builds up on the floor of the forests. And if all the saplings grow as they have insisted on allowing to grow, if all the saplings grow in between, the bush gets filled up with, there's no space between the trees, all that detritus falling from the trees, which is highly flammable, then builds up to much deeper than it would be. So when at time when these fires happen naturally and cyclically anyway, they become far, far worse because the amount of flammable material, gaseous, flammable, oil, gum-based material, that's all through the eucalyptus forest. So you cannot actually say it's to do with climate change unless you say the climate change 65 million years ago was the climate change that brought about the Australian continent's climate and the environment it has. And that's it. The fact of the matter is the Australian continent is an ecological oddity upon the world. It's different, it's unique, it's got unique animals, it's got unique plants, etc. So therefore it must tell you that it's a uniquely ecological system that's evolved in symbiotic relationship with itself. And the Aborigines, for instance, they may have altered the landscape somewhat, but they've had to adapt to the landscape as they've learned to live here. They've had to scientifically and rationally explore how to exist within the landscape, and that's why they cleared the bush. They allowed the bush to be cleared, and they burnt off occasionally because that meant they could control the fires. You can't actually stop the fires, but you can limit them by controlling it by limiting the amount of detritus on the bottom of the forest floor, because you can't stop gum trees shedding leaves, shedding bark and twigs and branches when there are times of less moisture. That's what they do. They draw the moisture into the centre of themselves and down as far as they need to. So long as they survive, they will sit there and then wait until it rains again, they'll all sprout up again. And that's what they do, and that's what they're good at. That's why they're brilliant trees for the continent of Australia, just that they're extremely dangerous because they're extremely flammable, and building houses and homes amongst them all is an extremely risky business that is something to do with the culture of building or whatever it is. A romantic notion about living in the gum trees, when the gum trees have got no sentiment whatsoever towards the people that live amongst them. That's basically how it is. Bushfires here are cyclical, been happening for millions and million years. I have plenty of evidence, evolutionary, factual, scientific evidence which shows that is a fact. Simply with the fact that gum trees, when they burn, the seeds germinate, many plants regenerate because of the burning, and the gum trees readily sprout new branches up the branches where most other trees and forests are destroyed forever. And that's a very significant point. So anyone suggesting that man-made climate change has affected these bushfires No, man ignoring what Aboriginals did for many, many years and many centuries, thousands of years were there looking after the bush. They ignored that, has made the bushfires far worse than it would be as far as property and life's concerned. But whether you can stop the bushfires or not, you can't. They're there as part of the natural ecological system of Australia, unfortunately. That's all it is to it. What you can do about it, you have to adapt the environment to suit the human beings that need to make a living off it. You cannot adapt yourself to a primitive environment and expect to exist in it, because the primitive environments are for the more primitive species. Bye.